Hello, lovely listeners. Welcome to episode 16 of Untold Wealth. We really hope that's the right number. We always have a bit of a laugh before the episode. And my name's Devon,
I'm Vince Balak.
and yeah, today we're going to be talking about a lovely episode idea or kind of title, Brick by Brick. Vince, I have a very, very important question to ask you.
Edge of my seat. What is it?
Yeah, it's a modern day question.
Okay,
In
okay.
fact, one could call it a TikTok question.
Okay.
Now I'm sure you're riveted.
Girl math? Are we doing an episode about girl math?
No, no, I don't. I wonder what girl math with brick by brick would look like, but no, it's very much more leaning towards boy math. Vince, how often do you think about the Roman Empire?
Oh, now that is a good question. At least I'd say once every 2 weeks.
You reckon? Is that a real answer or a meme answer?
I mean,
Just for my sake.
with the wisdom of people like Marcus Aurelius, Alexander the Great, who was Macedonian, Julius Caesar, it's difficult not to think about it so frequently.
Okay, okay.
No, I once every 2 months maybe is my real answer.
Yeah, it's such a tough one because like the Roman Empire's cool. Let's be real. Roman Empire was cool,
So
even though like if you like scrutinize any empire, they do pretty deplorable stuff. Let's be real, yeah.
But
But
wait,
they were pretty like cool as far as empires go.
so are we talking about the Roman Empire? Was the modern a little twist?
No, yeah, well, I was just more like a modern question,
I
but I'm
see.
definitely going to be talking about the Roman Empire
Dude, I'm
because
sorry.
I thought, brick by brick, this makes sense. This was actually suggested by my girlfriend. I said, "Hey, listen, podcast episode. The title is Brick by Brick. What do you think I should talk about?" And her mind kind of went to that TikTok meme and like the Roman Empire. So I found that quite funny, and I think it's quite. I think it makes a lot of sense, right? The Roman Empire is kind of what you look to when you think of the early civilizations and what it might have looked like in kind of a golden era, building up it's like this massive economy brick by brick, infrastructure, roads, and at one point, 20% of the world's population was under the Roman Empire, right? It kind
Insane.
of yeah, it expanded from 30,000 people. No, no, actually it was a couple thousand in like kind of the Roman hills of Italy, where they were quite well established, not too far from the ocean, but not, well, a little bit close to the ocean, but not too close because then they would be kind of, at risk of like piracy and plunderers and stuff like that. But also lovely hills, verdant landscape, and then they kind of just ballooned and had grown into this vast militarized nation that had very unique economic perspective, which I'm going to be chatting to you about today. A lot of stuff I had no idea about. So, yeah, hopefully you learn some stuff. And personally, I know a little bit of Roman history, more about the law, because when I studied law, especially South African law, you discover where its roots were from. Obviously, South Africa, being a Dutch colony, was influenced by Dutch law, but also had a lot of English prevalence as well. Well, I guess it was an English colony, but initially Dutch, I suppose. So a lot of it comes from English and Dutch common law, and English law is mostly derived from the Romans. So I kind of learned a bit about that in my studies at university. I've promptly forgotten all about it. So this kind of episode was a trip down memory lane, but I wasn't focusing about the legal sphere. All right, so Vince, the Roman Empire. You reckon we probably know a lot about the Roman Empire, the amount of movies and stuff that comes out today, right?
Dude, I would think that we would know everything about the Roman Empire. Like, I think they would keep meticulous records of their own, you know, ongoings and stuff.
I thought that too, but apparently that is pretty damn false, for two reasons mainly. Firstly, the Roman Empire is insanely old, like very old. This is from 600 BC to 400 AD. right? So this is like very, very old.
1,000 years.
Yeah, over 1,000 years. It's crazy. Um, and the second reason is they recorded a lot of their stuff not in paper, right? Paper wasn't very in supply back then. A lot of it was wax tablets, and whenever you find a wax tablet in some archaeological dig or not, it's very degraded, and you can't look at anything on a wax tablet thousands of years later. So we don't know a lot, and that has led to lots of debate, specifically centered around the economics of the Roman Republic, which then turned into a Roman Empire, right? So anywhere you look here, there are caveats across the board whenever economists have tried to measure economic performance of the Roman Empire, right? For those reasons that I just told you.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of inference you can draw, all right? Like there are surviving documents and texts, and there were paper records. There's the agriculture at the time, and I'm sure they discovered a few, other things that they can draw some inference from.
Are we
So here's what
talking about a period of time where like the Roman Empire used currency? Like that's actually something that I'm thinking about now. Like I know the
yeah,
septum or
so
something.
oh man, like there's basically half of this is what I'm going to talk about is kind of the structure of the Roman economy. Half of
Fantastic.
it is their rampant inflationary woes and minting of coinage and different coins they use, and it was just this rabbit hole of like, oh my god, like every emperor that came in tried to improve, and another emperor tried to stuff it up. It was crazy, but we'll get there. We'll get there. But structurally, the Roman economy was very agriculture based, right? It was an agrarian society. It did have some slaves in it. It did have a certain, nobility, middle class, then a lower class, and then a slavery class, right? Now, the slaves weren't exactly like American South slaves in history. They were treated a lot better, but they were still treated very poorly. And I want to hammer that. Like, you didn't
Yeah.
want to be a slave, but you could essentially buy yourself out of slavery. Like, there were slaves that were physicians, farmers, anything across the board in the society. That person could be a slave, right? And they had the opportunity to kind of buy themselves out of slavery. Doesn't mean they weren't treated poorly, but they definitely weren't, some of the worst slaves out there, I guess. So that was kind of a little backbone of their society. About 10% of their people were slaves, which is a lot of people, don't get me wrong. But perhaps they weren't treated as badly as some people thought. And then there was kind of this debate about what was the backbone of the Roman economy. And no one has really made this decision. They know there were markets in the economy. This empire pretty much encompassed all of Europe, England, a little bit of North Africa, a little bit into Asia. Like it was spread very, very wide. 50 million people. It had to have some kind of market-based trade economy between all these different provinces. But it was also very household subsistency, right? Households and farmers had to produce their own stuff, and trading only kind of occurred after they had
Yeah.
subsisted for themselves. And then there's the argument that it was also a little bit central. I mean, there was this governing kind of like empire, I suppose, with an emperor and with a government. Although, there's debates about, how much of a republic it was, and how like for the people it was. But I mean, there's definitely anecdotes and some stories that I hope to get to, where that shows that they had a pretty heavy hand at times in determining resource allocation. All right, cool. So that's kind of the basics of the Roman Empire. There's a few little cool stuff as well. Apparently, they were one of the first empires in the world to have displayed very high competency in comparative advantage. And if you remember comparative advantage, Vince, oh my word, don't know where that came from. It's when a producer or country specializes so much in a good that they have then an advantage in trading the good. They become very efficient in it, their production increases, and then they get greater gains if they were to disperse their specializations across different fields, right?
Yes.
They were one of the first kind of empires who perfected that. There's quite a lot of evidence for that. They had commercial banks, they gave out loans, they had mortgages. Their financial sector was pretty developed. I mean, this is thousands of years ago. Impressive. Also, impressively enough, they weren't starving, which is wild because that because after the Roman Empire fell, the only time that was really achieved thereafter was the industrial, or not really the industrial revolution, but maybe a little bit before, when you could industrially farm. That was like 17th, 18th century.
Yeah.
So they were like miles above. No one was like starving, essentially. Their Gini coefficient was only about 0.42 to 0.44. Gini coefficient is kind of a measure of aggregate equality in an area. The lower the Gini coefficient, the more equal a society is. And they were about zero point 0.4. So that's really not bad.
That's
That's
pretty
not terrible
respectable. I
at
mean,
all.
yeah, looking at this from like an 1,000 year timeline, which to me is kind of unfathomable. Like 1,000 years is insane to think about that this Roman Empire in some form or another existed and, built itself up to be fairly equal, I suppose, within this own hierarchy that it had.
Yeah, so I mean, I think in my research, this one paper, kind of described 13 different, I would say, historic empires, and Gini coefficients in those empires range from 0.25 to like 0.65. So zero point 0.4 is kind of like the median. So they were doing pretty well as an empire, in terms of equality. I mean, there were going to be some bad apples, but they did pretty well. So, I mean, I'm painting this picture of the Roman Empire as looking pretty damn good, but there were some definite downsides. But it lasted for 1,000 years, so they did some stuff right. Don't get me wrong. So, all right, one of the downsides of this very well established empire, I mean, as soon as it kind of started expanding beyond Italy to Europe, I mean, they even expanded to England, which I didn't even, I mean, I guess I knew about, like, but I didn't really like look at it on a map and see it. Like, that's how far it was. So how does this ancient empire that has to build roads all across these European nations, how do they tax all these different provinces efficiently? How do they do anything like governing centrally well? Apparently, it's well documented that they did. Um, Here's a little cool story. There's a written account from a commander in England, asking for his normal supplies and salaries to be delivered on time,
Oh,
uh, on time, which is quite crazy. And that was kind of being sent to the mainland in Europe. So they had a very efficient postal service at the least. I mean, probably wasn't terrific, but it got the job done. And this is a vast empire.
yeah. I mean, even outside of the Roman Empire, I think nowadays, looking back, it's very easy to dismiss like a lot of these ancient civilizations as being a lot dumber than they actually were. And that, like, for example, like there's always this anecdote about, oh, how did they build the Great Pyramids of Giza? We can't even do that today. But like these people were very smart. And as you said, like they kept their records on top of things because at the time they were basically like inventing the system, record keeping,
Essentially,
banking,
yes.
giving out loans, all that good stuff. Like
I
it's
mean, like
fascinating.
you look at any kind of like, what was, what's the right word? The sector of human development.
Yeah.
There's always a chapter in that sector revolving around the Roman Empire. Philosophy, industry, agriculture, military, like any of those has been, there has been a chapter in there for the Roman Empire, right? Whether it started at the Roman Empire or like, but like there's a chapter
Yeah.
from the Roman Empire that has brought that along.
Even
So I
in
mean,
the
pivotal
laws
in.
that you've been studying.
Oh yes, yes, legal jurisprudence, 100%, 100%. But yeah, so there were some downsides of this Roman Empire. The first being that when it got to the later stages of the Roman Empire, when it turned from a republic to an empire, so when it expanded, a republic is kind of a one nation society, whereas an empire is lots of nations and different cultures. At least that's how I kind of looked it up. That's kind of when this term creative destruction, which you might have heard of, was looked upon with kind of disdain. Because when you become an empire, you don't think of progressing your own technological advantages, right?
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know, creative destruction is when you kind of innovate to a certain extent that production vastly changes. And then those at the top of the production food chain they don't want the new innovation, but the new innovation kind of prevails anyway. Holistically, efficiency increases and society benefits. But when you get to an empire stage, you really want stability more than anything else. You want people working, providing, joining your military service and things like that.
Yeah, I imagine
And
you're
it's quite,
more concerned about like keeping your borders and like making sure that everything's working internally than even
oh
just
man,
innovating.
oh man, especially. Like there was a law in the Roman Empire because they kind of got destroyed in, I think it was like 400 to 200 BC, like the great the sack of Rome by Gaul, I think it was. There's a name for it. I'm butchering it, but like thereafter, Rome was like, we have to drastically rethink our military and the economy backing our military. So basically, the plebeians didn't want to join the military, but they heavily incentivized them to because they promised people who joined the military pieces of conquered land that
Oh,
they could like have. And this kind of just sparked this giant militocracy. I don't know if that's a good word, or a word at least. And that kind of made this military expansion so much easier. I don't know how long that lasted for. There's a name behind it. It's kind of like the oh, I can't quite remember now. But this military was a big wing of this nation. But yeah, they didn't want innovation, right? That's the kind of point I was getting to. And there's a story called Tiberius and the Glass. All right, so the story goes that Emperor Tiberius, I'm not too sure when he reigned, but I think it was towards like the latter portion of the empire. A gentleman came to him. He said, "I've invented a glass that doesn't break," and he demonstrated it to Tiberius. He kind of hit it with a hammer, and the glass didn't shatter. It just kind of just broke a little bit, and he kind of demonstrated that it could easily be repaired. And Tiberius's first question was, "Have you shown this to anyone? Have you told anyone about this invention?" And he said, "No one," because he kind of expected a prize from Tiberius. Tiberius is cool, and he executes the person immediately because he was terrified that this new form of glass would become more valuable than gold or silver, which terrified him. So there was this definite focus on short-term stability rather than long-term productivity, which is kind of one of the shortfalls that brought the Roman Empire to its end. But like centuries later, that would only be felt centuries later when some other empires closer to you are utilizing wagon wheels and different forms of infrastructure a lot better than you, right? So I can understand why an emperor wouldn't, be very hesitant.
yeah, but imagine if this guy just had invented the like most resilient substance on Earth. And he just got
That's a
executed. And to this day, we're
that's a
like,
funny thought.
what? What was
What
it?
if like what if what if like self-renewing energy had been invented in the Roman
Dude,
Empire, and it was just like what
Tiberius,
would they say?
we invented perpetual motion, sir. And he's like, oh,
No, 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 no! Get out of here! How will I feed my people? I think that was a legitimate quote from one of the emperors in one of these anecdotes.
what a guy.
But that's kind of one of the reasons I think the Roman Empire fell. The second and third reason was the empire had grown to such a stage, it was quite hard to defend all its borders and keep high communication. But the third reason, and what I alluded to earlier, was this rampant inflation that the Roman Empire suffered from for like its entire lifespan. It was pretty crazy. So the Roman Empire first minted its coins in 400 BC. They first were bronze. It was all right. And then I think at about 200 BC, they discovered silver and how to kind of craft it well. And then they minted their first silver coins at 93% purity, later to 98% purity. But the first Punic Wars happened, the second Punic Wars happened. You don't need to know about those wars. I didn't research them at all. I don't have enough time to go deep into Roman history. But essentially, they started to run out of silver. And the silver that people have been accustomed to for years, these silver coins started to decrease in quality to fund the war, which I'm sure you can understand as someone who knows about inflation. This is a really bad thing.
Yes.
So essentially, what the emperors at the time did was they would debase their coins. They would make them less pure silver, essentially. Sometimes going from 89% to 80% to 70, 75%. And the public catches on to these things, you know? People are really smart when it comes to currency, you know, on aggregate. And eventually, this kind of caused a bit of an internal collapse of the Roman monetary system. Um, Eventually, you'd have to pay four coins for the same good instead of one, which is quite literally inflation, right?
Yeah.
But like, and this continued throughout the Roman Empire from 200 BC essentially to 400 AD. The same cycle kept repeating and in different degrees of severity, right? An emperor would come in, something bad would happen, a war would start, a city was burnt down, or they wanted to erect a monument or whatever. Whatever was happening at the time. There were numerous things that were happening in that giant time period. What they would do is they would lower the quality of the coin, you know, and then they would make the people suffer, and they would have that tiny profit that I think we spoke about. That we spoke about in episode 13, Vince. I think you spoke about it, right?
Yeah.
Because central banks make profit by printing money. You know, the drawback is inflation. It's why central banks have to be very careful when they, or treasuries or whatever, when they print money. And this kept going. It went to such, it got so bad. Okay, at about, I think it was called the War of the Moneys, right? This was Emperor Aurelius. He came into power in about 350 AD, something like that. It was near the end of the Roman Empire. But he came into power and there was no silver in circulation. How they usually got silver was that they warred out to other nations. Italy doesn't have many silver mines. They got silver mines from Spain, from like East Asia or West Asia rather, and I don't think England so much, but Spain was their kind of their main silver provider. But they were being battered by so many battles and bandits and different empires kind of coming into their territory, stealing their gold and silver, relinquishing them of their silver mines, that it got to a stage where their denarius, which is kind of like their magnum opus of currency during the Roman Empire, didn't have any silver in it. I think the denarius, was actually, I think it got replaced by, they replaced their coinage so many times by different emperors' names. I think Aurelius also had a coin of himself.
Of course.
That's just how it went back in the day. But yeah, so he came into power and a lot of their land had been taken. So his first recourse was, he said, okay, we're going to conquer the land. First and foremost, we have internal strife. There's nothing that Rome has not, figured out by going to war. And he was successful. The Roman Empire is very successful in their military strategies in war. So that was his first thing. He got back his land. He got back England. He got back Gaul. He got back a bit of like Jordan and Spain. And then he said, all right, he was looking for a scapegoat, or at least to fix what the previous empires had kind of stuffed up in, especially rampant inflation and the debasing of their currency. And this was kind of called the War of the Moneys. He went to war and started killing and imprisoning minters at these places, basically telling the public that they were debasing the currency, or at least helped in debasing the currency, making less silver and pocketing the silver for themselves and kind of making some cash on the side, which apparently there were some accounts of them doing. I think they probably did do it as well, just off the top of my head. I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
But he kind of just used them as a full scapegoat and then reinstituted kind of a very, very high, or at least the person after him reinstituted a very high purity currency. But by that point, after so many years and years of high purity currency, low purity currency, high purity currency, low purity currency, when they reinstituted from like a 0% pure to a 93% pure, and they said, listen, no, like 93% is it. Basically, no one could buy any goods because the goods weren't worth a 93% pure coin. Like, someone went to the market and they couldn't buy any bread because the bread was only worth 3 bronzes. not one whole silver coin,
Damn.
right? And this, it was terrible. It was terrible. Basically, what had to be made was this edict of max prices, something like that. There's a Roman name for it. But this was someone at the time who said, okay, these are the max. This is the max price people can ask for gold, minimum and maximum price for goods, and it ended terribly. When you set price ceilings like that and don't let the market react how it wants to, it goes terribly, and this contributed heavily to inflation during the Roman Empire, and thereafter it kind of crumbled into the Byzantine Empire, was conquered by the Byzantine Empire. It was just kind of flanked on all fronts by foes, and then internally, this monetary policy was just shocking, right? It was it was really bad.
Yeah, I mean, the last course of actions that you've just illustrated sounds very like frantic panic, short-term solutions without any sort of fixation on what this is going to affect the long term of. And
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, I think we should all be looking and like thinking more about the Roman Empire, but not the monetary policy, is kind of what I got from this.
but it was so weird because like you look into it, and it was just emperor after emperor just doing the same thing. Some would fix it, some would just make the complete same mistake, right? It was exacerbated by wars and stuff, right? You can understand an emperor that if there's a war going on, saying, okay, we need extra silver to pay our highly militarized nation, right? That makes sense. But sometimes they just wanted to like make things, and they were like, okay, cool, let's just make it 75% pure and just keep the excess silver for a few extra coins and then pay a few more people. But that trickles down, and I say that unironically, into high inflationary periods, like years down the line, because the people caught on, essentially. Yeah, and that's how the kind of Roman economy was built, brick by brick. They advanced many areas of the world, as we discussed, but yeah, they didn't have the best grasp on their economies. Apparently they had a small portion of time where they kind of essentially had fiat currency. It was like after, I think, the Second Punic War, or during the Second Punic War, that they didn't have any silver. Like they had no silver whatsoever. They printed, made pure 1% bronze coins, and they said this isn't backed by silver. This is just governmental currency.
It's really interesting.
But then as soon as they kind of won the war, they went straight back to silver, and it kind of was this silver standard, I guess, back in the day.
Yeah, I mean,
They did.
you look at a period of over 1,000 years, and like, I guess in our modern age, it's very easy, or it's like difficult to comprehend like 1,000 years of the same kind of things happening over and over and over again, especially when we're like, oh, technology is just exponential, everything's growing exponentially. But having like a period of time where nothing really, like, I mean, obviously it expanded and grew stronger, but like in terms of monetary policy, a lot of the same things happened and happened and happened. Like it's really fascinating on why, like during the Industrial Revolution, when a lot of economics was formed, like why that didn't happen in some way or another during the Roman Empire during its height.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's a crazy time to be alive. I mean, there was only about, I think, 100 years of the Roman Empire where they weren't at war. During that like 1,000 year kind of like reign, people weren't warring with it. There was like this times of peace and stuff. But yeah, that is, Vince, that's the Roman Empire. Brick by brick, the Roman Empire was built, and coin by coin, it fell. So I'm very keen to see what you've brought to the table for this episode.
I really love the direction that you went with for brick by brick. Like that, it's not often that we get a Devon history episode, but I'm really happy that we dove into that because yeah, the Roman Empire, memes aside of how often we think about it, it's a very cool period of time. And I also had a great kind of exploration of what brick by brick could be, exploring like the brick industry, perhaps the economics of modern day buildings, and maybe like some real estate stuff. But the topic that I ended up going with, I think, is going to be a beautiful complement to what you spoke about. But I want to actually start off with a quote. And I want you, I'm going to send it to you actually, and I want you to read it for our listeners.
All right.
So I'm going to send it to you now.
Let's take a look.
And yeah, give it your best shot.
Okay, very nice. I see where this is going. Ladies and gentlemen, what Vincent has just sent me is from what my estimation, just a bunch of hieroglyphs in a line. I see bird, frog, snake, I think like a wheat, smaller bird, bigger bird, and then that kind of continues for just a line.
We have a
Discord chat.
double history episode here for Brick by Brick.
Overlapping empires. Let's go.
Because I'm going to be maybe touching on like the Egyptian Empire, but mainly talking about the pyramids. Because obviously, they're not bricks like brick and mortar bricks that we know them, but they were built out of stone bricks themselves. So I wanted to kind of dive in to, well, how much it cost, how long, the specifics behind it, ancient Egypt as a whole, and a few kind of more modern contemporary queries around it. But yeah, I'm very excited. I don't know if the fact that you spoke about the Roman Empire and I'm speaking about ancient Egypt for Brick by Brick is blowing my mind a little bit. But to not keep you in suspense, this quote is just a poem that they found in Egypt. I think it reads as, "Follow your heart as long as you live. At all times, follow your heart," which is fairly profound for ancient Egypt, I think.
That's what this says.
Yes, that's what that says.
That's lovely.
But yeah, we're going to be talking about the Great Pyramids of Giza, which, in my opinion, is the most substantial brick structure that exists in the world today and has existed in the world for over 4,000 years.
I don't agree. Stonehenge, Great Wall of China.
I mean, potentially they are contenders.
Those are substantial bricks.
Those
Let's
are.
be real.
But maybe I'll dive a little bit. I'll dive a little bit deeper.
Convince me. Convince me. Tell me why.
I think there's a lot going for the Great Pyramids that have it hold that title quite handedly. But to set the scene here, ancient Egypt during the time that we'll be speaking about it had a lot going for it resource-wise. And touching on a lot of things that you've said, this was a civilization that was built around agriculture. And where they were placed along the River Nile, they had essentially crop-growing weather year-round, which I think contributed to its success in a very considerable fashion. They, as you mentioned, could subsist for themselves. They could feed their working population and grow their labor force without any worry of starvation or shortages, and then trade the excess to neighboring regions for goods and services. And that's something that I want to kind of point out, because at this time of ancient Egypt that we'll be speaking about, there was no currency to speak of. That would only come later. Much of ancient Egypt's economy was based on bartering, exchanging goods and services for other goods and services. And in fact, only 2,000 years after they built the Great Pyramids did they actually adopt some sort of standardized pricing. But even then, it was more like metals being worth a certain weight and then using that as a kind of a proxy for other materials, grain, things like that. But yeah, the Great Pyramids, and this still blows my mind, those three big pyramids that sit in Egypt today were built over the course of 60 years, with each pyramid taking about 15 to 20 years to build.
I thought it would take longer.
You would think so, wouldn't you?
That's impressive.
Like, it was very quick. So between the years of 2550 BC and 2490 BC, all three of these great pyramids were built in what can only be described as a frantic period of construction. And yeah, actually looking at how much these structures cost to build at the time is super difficult. Like, I dove deep into it, and
we had problems with the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
This is like another 2,000 years earlier.
And especially since everything's based on bartering, like, you don't really have much of an idea like how much it would even cost to build these structures within the time. But I think to kind of persuade you that these are, you know, brick by brick, the biggest and best brick buildings that we have today, I wanted to give you some fun pyramid facts that might give you an idea of the immense logistics that took place. So yeah, as I said before, the pyramids were built over a period of 60 years, and it was believed, and I'm going to be using a lot of ranges for a lot of the figures that I have here because historians don't really agree, or at least don't have enough material there to give like a very accurate estimation. But over that 60 years period of time, it's believed that over like 100,000 workers worked in 3-month shifts to finish just the Great Pyramid of Khufu within that 20-year period. And that varies. Some people believe it's 40,000, some people believe it's 70,000, which sounds like a lot of people, especially to be working fairly continuously throughout these 20 years. But during this time, Egypt had a population of about 1.5 million to 1.7 million people. So if you kind of look at it from that perspective, it's not that much of a percentage of the population. But the pace at which they were built is staggering. There's various estimations, but historians say that for it to have been built within that 20-year period of time, just the Great Pyramid of Khufu, they would have needed to be a block placed every about 5 to 20 minutes throughout the 20 years. And that's not within like a 9 to 5 schedule. That's the entire 24-hour period of a day.
Oh my God.
And yeah, like the logistical practices of like, okay, they didn't have the limestone for the bricks. They had to.
That's what I was about to say. They had to bring it. Yeah.
They had to go and find a quarry like ages away and then bring it up by ship from like the River Nile, and then using ramps and pulleys and all sorts actually start to place them. And yeah, when you look at it from that perspective, it's really unsurprising that some people think that these massive pyramids were, built by aliens or whatever. But I think, as I said earlier, I think people during these periods of time, whether it be ancient Egypt or the Roman Empire, were a lot smarter than we give them credit for. Like the pyramids themselves are also not just weren't built very quickly, but they were also built with incredible precision. Like the faces of the pyramid, like the corners of them, the vertices I think they're called, face like the 4 cardinal directions. All 3 of them have like the same kind of shape and orientation. And the way that people found that this was accurate is because each of the pyramids are actually off by a couple degrees, but all 3 of them are off by the same amount. So very precise. And even if they did make a mistake, they made it for all of the pyramids that they built.
So it makes you think that it was very intentional.
Exactly. And there's some astrological significance, like placing them under Orion's belt and things like that. Super cool stuff. But a real fascinating structure to have been built 4,000 years ago, which, yeah, is incredible. Have you any thoughts about this? Have I persuaded you so far?
All I really know about the pyramids is that there's a lot of wild conspiracy theories about how exactly they were made. I think this is weird to say, widely accepted conspiracy theory, but the one I've heard about the most is the internal ramp theory. They have to make it with an internal ramp, and
Yes.
the way the blocks are laid out. I don't know anything about it. I just think it's quite funny that that we don't know really.
It's really cool. And I think even though it is quite mysterious, the fact that people still have I don't know, the fact that these people were smart enough or did something that we can't do nowadays with our technology and, infrastructure is really quite awesome. Even I remember reading something about Roman concrete, how they only recently found out how Roman structures, even though they were built 2,000 years ago, can still be in such a great condition when modern concrete deteriorates over 50 years. than using like salt water and stuff. So yeah, props to all these ancient peeps. Like it's really quite cool. But
They made good bricks, man. They did.
they
They
really
did.
did.
Okay, listen, credit where it's due.
But yeah, I couldn't unfortunately find an estimate to how much the pyramids would have cost at the time. But I could find plenty of resources telling me how much people think the pyramids would cost to build today. Do you have any guesses with all our modern technology and fancy stuff?
I mean, you just said earlier that like something we couldn't do today. That makes me think I mean, I know we could do it today. I'll be real with you. Like, listen, there's very few structures we can't make today that were made earlier.
For sure.
I mean, I don't think there's any structures today that we can't make. But that's a tough one, man. I have literally no clue. To make all three,
Let's just go with one. Let's just go with the Great Pyramid Khufu, the largest one.
the largest, the big boy. Getting the limestone, so we got to factor in transport, equipment, people, amount of time. Let's say we can only build it in like a year. I don't know, man. Between 50 and $150 million.
Okay. Not quite, unfortunately.
It's okay.
One of the resources that I read about, which is also the top result when you search for this prompt, puts the figure at about $1.2 billion.
Oh, I didn't think it was gonna get into the billions. Oh my god.
And they got this figure by essentially estimating that each of the 2.5 ton blocks of limestone would cost around 495 like dollars, and you times that by the 2.3 million blocks that make up the largest of the pyramids.
Stop it. There's not 2.3 million blocks of limestone.
There-
Are you serious?
That's what they say.
That is absurdly massive. Wow.
And yeah, you get that figure of about 1.14 billion, and then you throw in some labor costs or whatever, and you get that $1.2 billion figure.
So I was pretty good with the labor costs. Actually, 50 to 150 million is exactly the labor cost they chipped on top.
Just the limestone
Ooh.
was a bit
I didn't
undersold.
think the limestone would be the most expensive part.
I mean-
I didn't even like think about that.
See, other people give it as a range of like as high as $5 billion and $3 billion instead. But I think you're right in saying that even like with the amount of technology that we have today compared to what they had then, it is doable. But that kind of 1.2 to $5 billion figure is maybe a little intangible to think about. So to put that number into perspective, the One World Trade Center cost about $3.9 billion to make, and the Burj Khalifa was around $1.5 billion, to kind of give you some points of comparison.
Wait, the One World Trade Center was 3.9
Yes,
and Burj Khalifa was 1.5?
exactly.
Wow. Why were the trade centers so expensive?
I'm actually not too sure if this is the One World Trade Center that they built after 9/11, or if this is referring to those two towers. I think
One of
it's
the twins.
I think it's the former. Like this was built afterwards, but I could be wrong about that.
But still, like, why would the world's tallest structure, which I'm sure would have to be like a technological marvel, cost only half of what? Okay, I don't know, that's just weird to me.
No, that's a
What
fair
I'm
point.
assuming is a relatively normal size skyscraper in New York. Like,
I mean, New York is, I don't know if the real estate is truly inflating that price compared to the Burj Khalifa, but nevertheless, I mean, comparing those two, like, I think that tracks. Like the Great Pyramid Khufu, rebuilding that today, I would also probably pull in the ballpark of massive and impressive structures like the Burj Khalifa. But yeah, I kind of took on a bit of a tangent and just thought about like, okay, if we pretend for a second that the Great Pyramids, or at least one of them, was built for $1.2 billion at the time during ancient Egypt. Like I was thinking to myself, okay, what if like this is the most like big brain investment? Like, is this brick structure, has it returned substantially more than it was built for in those kind of 4,000 years that it's been around.
Are you saying are you saying that it might have paid itself off in 4,000 years worth of tourism?
Well,
Huh?
that's what I'm trying to answer here, and that's what I was initially
That's a
prompted with.
great question.
But in an interesting turn of events, and maybe a little sad, I was looking at the ticket sales for the Great Pyramids. And in 2016, which apparently was a terrible year for the pyramids, they only made about $2.5 million in ticket sales. But if we give them the benefit of the doubt for previous years, that figure might have been much better, maybe even double, like $5 million. And if we kind of extrapolate that figure to the very beginning of when pyramid tourism, quote unquote, started in the 19th century, you kind of times those figures together and you get a final total that is hovering around 1 point something billion, like 1.15. So
Okay.
if we look at it from the point of time when tourism for the pyramids like really peaked and like started properly, like the pyramids are just about paying themselves off to this day.
But that's awesome because they're kind of breaking even,
Yes,
and that's only in the last 200 years.
exactly.
And they're a national symbol, and they were still used 3,800 years before that. Like, I'm sure they would bring royalty from other nations and things like that to come view their massive pyramids.
Absolutely. I think we if we looked at
Yeah.
it from the full 4,000 year like point of reference, it would definitely pay itself off. But I found it very interesting that it just so happened to be that like this 2016 ticket sales, like timesing that by the 19th century, like when it first started, got to the point where like this year, if you times it by such and such, like we are just now turning a profit on the pyramids, which is very silly.
It all just adds up. That's perfect.
And yeah, so from next year onwards, the pyramids are finally profitable. Thankfully, good for them.
Do you know how much the Roman Empire was worth back in the day?
No,
In
no.
terms of tons of wheat, because that's kind of the only way you can measure it.
Okay.
Take a guess.
Okay. So if the Great
in-
Pyramids were,
It's in millions of tons.
yeah, I mean, if the Great Pyramids were, or just one cost about 1.5 billion to make, I'm gonna guess like 30 Great Pyramids, like 45 billion.
Nowhere close. A lot less. Oh, it's 50 million tons,
Oh, jeez.
which is about what is it, 50 to 90 billion USD in today's standard. I know it's impossible to make that apples to apples
Yeah,
comparison.
that's just
like,
wheat.
It's literally impossible. It's like, yeah, it's a completely different empire with different living standards and different prices and stuff like that.
But
But
I was going to
yeah.
ask, when you were looking at the Gini coefficients for these ancient empires, and I was like looking at my little like notepad here of like ancient Egypt, I so wanted to ask you about what the Gini coefficient of,
I don't remember. I do not
oh
remember.
well.
Audience, leave it down below.
But
I bet you it would be so hard to calculate that though, man. 2,000
Absolutely.
years. I mean, how long did the Egyptian Empire last for? I don't even know.
about
It
6,000
was around
years.
about jeepers, madness, absolute madness.
Yeah, like
What the hell? Ugh.
that was
It's
kind of
crazy to think about.
one of the reoccurring things when I was researching this is that like 6,000 years is incomprehensible to imagine. And even more so the fact that like within those 6,000 years, like massive structures like the Great Pyramids were built and like empires grew and like shrunk because of wars and things like that. But like when you compare it to like modern day, especially with technology, like it seems like not a lot happened during those 6,000 years. And maybe that's just me being biased about like the age that I live in. But that was
Absolutely.
staggering to me.
It's a long time.
It's a very long
Wow.
time. But whether it be the, Roman Empire and the roads that they put out brick by brick, or the pyramids that they hold up possibly an internal ramp, I don't know, and place brick by
No,
brick.
no, no. Don't sign off. Tell me what you think the theory was. Do you think it was the normal way of construction, like that maybe 10,000 BC, where they did it outside and then in and then like
And they were
I
like
don't know,
things were being
scaffolding and
dragged by
structures all around
elephants.
it? Oh, I don't know about that, but yeah, sure.
I
I was more thinking like people.
I think I've been saying this throughout the episode, but I think people within like the context of their time, ancient Rome, ancient Egypt, like I didn't even get into the fact that like echoing your point of how diligent ancient Egypt was in that like record keeping and like how their tax structure was one of the main reasons that they could actually afford to get the Great Pyramids up and running. But yeah, these people I think are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. And just because they were working away with like chisels and hammers and stuff doesn't necessarily mean that they couldn't have done this. So I'm of the camp that whatever means external or internal ramp, ramps, pulleys, whatever way that they did it, that they did do it without any, high tech extraterrestrial aid.
Okay. So you're saying you believe in any human conspiracy theories? Like they're all kind of within the realm of possibility for you.
I think
Okay.
they got the job done, and I mean, look at them. 4,000 years later, they just they started making a profit from
Pretty
it.
good national investment, to be honest. Like imagine that's like the opposite of the Romans. They were just like way too forward thinking. They're
Yes,
like 6,000 years from now, they're gonna be like so thankful we made it. Our people will prosper forever, and they were kind of right. They were kind of right.
but yeah, let us know in the comments if there's any other interesting facts about the Roman Empire, the ancient Egyptians, or any other ancient civilization that started their empire brick by brick and got the job done in one way or another. But from us here at Untold Wealth, it's been a pleasure having you. Please do like and subscribe on YouTube, rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and things like that. And yeah, leave us a comment on what you think we should chat about next. I have been Vince Balak.
And I've been Devon.
See you later.